Welcome to the next episode of Battleground Chats, where I will interview an interesting person in the risk and resilience sphere around Australia and the world. And I'm very fortunate in this episode to have a good friend of myself and our business, Kirsty Sullivan, to join us. So thank you for joining us at Battleground Chats.
Hi, Craig. Thanks for having me today. This is a really great opportunity.
Excellent. Now, you have a fascinating background. Where have you come from? How did you get into risk and resilience? And let's start with that because it is really interesting.
Sure, Craig. I think I've been very lucky. I've had a very diverse background. I've had a lot of opportunities that I've grabbed and said yes to. So I think that probably led me down this path. And I think like most people in the industry, particularly in risk and resilience, I didn't make an educated decision to become this. I have fallen into it, so to speak, and fallen in love with it, to be honest.
Yep.
I originally joined as a very young teenager into the Royal Australian Navy. And I started by doing mine warfare on small boats. And then I actually, in 1999, the Navy asked for the first batch of women submariners to put their hands up and see who'd like to volunteer.
Wow. Yep.
So I was possibly crazy enough to have a go at that. And so then I started to do acoustic warfare analytics on board submarines. So that was really
So
the
what
start.
is that? Explain. So what does that mean?
It's a fascinating world. So how do I explain this? If you think about everything in the ocean has a specific noise.
Yep.
You can track and understand and learn a lot about other platforms or the environment out there by listening. You also have analytical tools, but also listening. And everything out there has a unique signature, a bit like your fingerprint. So if I think about a merchant vessel out there, does it have two shafts or one shaft? How many propeller blades does it have? You can actually learn and understand a lot about speed and direction and all sorts of types of information. So that's really beneficial, obviously, for a submarine that can't see.
Yes.
And you do a various range of other jobs as well. So I think what really drew me into submarines was you need to understand your role, but then you need to understand a lot about other people's roles and about how the submarine operates. What is the actual job of the platform? What's the bigger strategy or the purpose you're contributing to? And little did I realise the risk that was involved in doing those types of jobs.
Yes, I'm sure.
So that was really the start. And then after 10 years roughly in the Navy, I decided to actually get out and I took a job with government, still within defence, but working with work health and safety and quality and assurance. So that was a bit more of a step, another side of the triangle, if you will. And then the third part of that was I ended up leaving defence after a while and I worked for a government business enterprise. And that was still around ships and submarines, but I broadened. I actually went, apart from quality assurance, that grew into internal audit, third party and supplier qualification audit.
Okay, so you started to broaden your thinking around risk.
Exactly. And that also started to include some technical aspects around product quality. And that then grew into realising, there's some skill sets here that were readily transferable from military that I've actually taken into government and then into a government business enterprise.
Yeah.
And the risk part really became quite clear, particularly around the risk that we were immediately assessing, the risk for the future, and what we were then trying to do, which we didn't call at the time, but it was business resilience. We were trying to look at, how do we then actually understand this risk and what do we do to either prevent it, but more importantly, mitigate it if it does happen. So that grew into a risk and insurance job. And that's when I really went, actually, I think there's a career in this and I really love it.
Excellent. So that's actually fascinating because a lot of people ask me, how do you get into risk, right? Is there a course I can take? Is there a degree I can take? And there are some courses to teach you about it, but really most people we meet fall into it, or they get an opportunity at work, or they start to realize that actually what they're doing is kind of related to risk and resilience. How about that? And they enjoy it. Because it is fun what we do if you don't overthink it. I think a lot of people overthink what we do and therefore, hurt the industry, but also just don't kind of get what they're trying to achieve and therefore don't enjoy it as much.
No, I think you're right, Craig. And I dare say there's been some lessons learnt over the years, and particularly as I left defence and I moved into energy working for a critical infrastructure organisation, and then now I've moved into private health insurance for a national business. One of the things I've really learnt along the way was don't overcomplicate it. Don't overcook it. Risk needs to be simple and understandable, and you need to build that consistent language and understanding to help our business and our staff to understand it, because we always say that they're our eyes and ears for risk. So I think that was a big lesson learnt for me. And I think the other lesson learnt was when we do it, apart from keeping it simple, we need to be able to replicate it and encourage others to actually then feel empowered to do risk for us as well. It's not just about the risk team.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. That's really interesting. So in your time starting as a Navy officer, through the different worlds into now the CRO, what do you think's changed the most in the risk and resilience landscape? It's okay to say nothing, but I reckon quite a bit's changed.
I think you're right. And I must admit as well, I wasn't an officer, I was a sailor, so there was a slight difference. I have to be correct there.
I have to get my terms right.
There has been a lot of change, and I think for me I've seen a change from it's not as simple as it used to be. I think there's an increase in the complexity of the tools that we use. And I think that's a great opportunity, but I also think it's also a bit of a burden, and it can be a challenge to implement and roll those types of things to a business, because I'm still a big believer of it's a tool, it's software, it's a product, we need to use it well. And so I think the theory of rubbish in, rubbish out is very important. So spending that time and effort to really understand the technology and how it can work for us, not vice versa. I think there's been a huge... And that's really interesting,
if I can just touch on that.
Yeah,
because, as I've mentioned a few times in previous episodes and also online, in Australia, the uptake of tools is very low compared to other parts of the world. You've always been a big proponent of get tools to help you, right?
Yes.
And I've really valued that, but it also it gives me hope that Australia's catching up. Because like you, I've always built tools to help me do my job better and easier. And I think if you bring in the right tool, it doesn't have to be a burden. It should be an aid, should help you. And I think that's where people, especially in Australia, for some reason, get caught up, they get scared, they get burnt, they get nervous. But you can actually find the right tool to help, right? It doesn't have to be a burden.
No, I agree. And I think another lesson that I've learned over the years, I've been very privileged to be able to implement tools across 3 major organisations for not only risk but also business resilience. And a big lesson I learnt was understand what we need first and how are we going to use it. Because whilst that third party means well, sometimes there's a disconnect. Maybe we haven't communicated it well enough, but sometimes there's a disconnect of what are we going to be using it for? How are we going to actually use it as an organisation? And I think that can often be a bit of a challenge. Sometimes you end up with a tool that maybe isn't quite doing what you need, or you haven't set it up in order to do that right for your business. And rolling it out in a phased approach that your business can take, have some small wins, celebrate that, see the benefit, and then grow it.
Yeah. No, I love that approach. Proof of concept, phased rollout, grow into it. That term, I'm using that term, grow into the tool. Thank you. All right. So that's great. Okay. So you've seen the tools change. You've seen the way that, and the complexity. You mentioned complexity brought on by tools, but there's also complexity brought on by compliance needs, regulators and things like that, which coupled together, I'm assuming, is making it even more complex.
Yes, it's a fascinating world, and I must say I enjoy the compliance aspect. Some people may not, and I think that's definitely a big change I've seen over the years. Is a huge increase in the complexity of the regulatory or compliance. I shouldn't say burden, because it's very important, and I think what we're trying to achieve with that, I can see, and I think that's very important as a nation, but also globally. We need that. We need to build resilience, and I think those organisations are trying to help us as businesses to build that and to almost give us boundaries and guidelines to operate in. But I think the complexity of that compliance and then what that means in a business when you actually roll out compliance obligations, when you actually roll out assurance programs and you think about the policies, the management and the administration of that, I think that is a risk for a business, and I've seen that really change in the years. So trying to use tools to help us to automate and to make that simple so that we can then focus on the more complex or the things that we really need people engagement in. That's been an important piece. It's something we've seen a big shift in, and certainly compliance, I've seen a shift being owned by more people within the business as well.
Yeah. That's really interesting, because one of the things you said, which I love, is taking the time to understand why the compliance need is there, because we see quite often where people see it as a burden, I must do it, without kind of going, okay, if I actually try to understand what is the regulator, the entity, compliance entity, trying to do, it can actually help me to overcome the negativity, but also maybe to work with it for the benefit of the business as well, which is a fascinating take on it. Yeah,
I agree, Craig. And there's quite a few out there that are probably good examples at the moment. And I think the one that relates mostly to risk and resilience, there's a new compliance standard coming out at the moment for our prudential regulator, and that's really focusing around operational risk management. But we've actually done a bit of a rebadging of that. So we're really getting our business to understand it's around organisational resilience. And what we're trying to implement, whilst, yes, it is a compliance requirement, it's actually good business practice. It's about providing the mechanisms, the functions, the upskilling and education of our people to really build a business that can withstand a disruption event. We can come out of that and learn. We prefer not to have them, but we need to prepare for when and if they happen. And I think that's really where we've had to sell that to the business to get them to see why we're doing it and the benefits for them and the organisation. But importantly, one of the other things that we're getting out of this is that people are understanding there's a bit of a win personally for them too. It's making them question their own personal resilience and their resilience in their families and their community environments. So I think there's a bit of an added bonus to those compliance requirements.
Yeah. So you're talking about CPS 230 for our audience.
I am.
I'm really interested into this personal resilience. How have you seen that played out on the back of CPS 230?
I think what it's doing is it's actually highlighting we can develop and implement a raft of tools and processes and upskill our people. But at the end of the day, if we have a disruption event, we're still going to be heavily reliant upon our people. So I think it's highlighting the requirements to really conduct repetitive training, to look at people's skills and their competencies. Do we have the right people in the right roles through those events? To frequently exercise, do the practices and the drills, and take the scare factor out of it. Get people to actually enjoy running some of these tests and processes. So this is going to be a journey that will take years, and it's a continual improvement process, really. But I think what it is also doing is it's teaching people some personal skills around, well, how do I actually respond at a time of crisis or disruption in an organisation? We're getting them to have a bit more self-awareness and understanding, and then we're looking at, well, what are some of those more soft skills that we can help develop and grow in our people? And I think some of the work that our other divisions are doing, where it's actually building people's skills around their mindset, their personal resilience, how they look after themselves, that's really supporting organisational resilience and operational risk.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I've always held that just because you're a good exec, for example, doesn't mean you're a good crisis manager.
Absolutely.
And part of the reason we exercise is for people to understand what they're capable of.
Yes.
And it's okay to say, I'm actually not the right person to lead an incident. I'm not the right person to fulfill this non-BAU role. And understanding yourself, understanding your mindset, your motivations can really help you. And then also, as you say, take that back to your life outside of work can be really helpful. That's really, really interesting. It has been a wonderful chat. We could talk for hours, and we'll have you back on in the future, but Thank you so much for giving your time to our audience and to Battleground Chats.
Thanks, Craig. It's been really great having a chat with you today.